I see it. I see it. Hot Cow Lady slowly explains RPS to me again for the 30th time. I described like the term we're going to be talking about as overlap today, but I just made it up. No one has essentially ever discussed this, to my knowledge. So yesterday we made this document. This is I would describe an entry-level approach of how to understand RPS. 80% of the time, I net play. If you've ever heard me say, oh, like this person's risk reward isn't as good as it could be, I'm taking advantage of it. Subject coming up is basically going to be the reason why it's so common, right? Essentially in this, right? I talked a little bit about this before, but let's emphasize the endgame goal is to have your opponent commit to something that you do not need to commit to in order to beat. So for example, this is a fantastic direct example of like, let's say wake up run up. So let's talk about what overlap is, right? So overlap, you rotate between different options that are easily beatable without looking for. So like the example I always use is like if someone does like run up DP and you just block, like you don't even react, then you punish it, right? You just kill them for it. You play as Kai, you run up DP and it gets blocked. You do run up Stun Dipper next time instead. This is an extreme example. The kind of concept that I feel like ends up happening is people end up getting too desperate they get too desperate to enforce their game plan. And instead of like, slowing down, they would usually choose more aggressive options to just force things. So Leo players would do 2d6H and 8 PRC if you would throw them, right? They can just directly beat something, right? What if they just don't react that time? Placing too much expectation on your opponent to always react correctly, they may just like be looking for something entirely different. You can use mental stack. Obviously there are situations where, they throw you every time, so it's like, well, of course, you just do it then, right? Just kill them. If it's more like sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't, then this, for example, right, they don't react, you just lost 50 meter for essentially a chance. Whereas, like, what if you just force offense in a different way? Instead of using meter to facilitate it, you go for a shimmy instead. You are putting more emphasis or expectation on your opponent to interact with you correctly. And the fact is, no one is going to be flawless in fighting games, right? There are people that are really good at looking for these situations. Of course, like, it's rare you'll find someone that can 100% throw it every time. Even if this is correct, you get straight in this interaction, you create an RPS interaction around if you use meter or not. Try to force their game plan too hard. Because even if you guess right in this interaction, you create still an unstable RPS interaction. Sometimes you can still like kill characters for this. If damage is equal, this can be really bad, especially if they have meter, right? If they have meter, the RPS interaction changes, which if you guys are familiar with Exerd, there was a system mechanic in the game called Blitz. And essentially Blitz was a parry, right? Like if you hit them and they did IAD Blitz, you would get parry. What people would do, you IAD button, you get anti-air. You think, well, they'll anti-air me, I will just Blitz instead. Creates the above situation. What if they just don't anti-air you? Almost an RPS interaction in this RPS interaction if they even just react. Here's the problem. If they air throw you, they cover both options at once without even considering your RPS, right? So let's say if you just air dash at me and I air throw you, it doesn't matter what you're doing. In this case, if you force things by using Blitz to force the interaction or create an RPS interaction out of it, you just lost 25 meter without me even thinking about it. Almost everybody in fighting games does this. RPS like this is almost entirely pointless. Even if this works, they can just adapt and air throw you. You can create an RPS interaction out of this, but it sucks. Your adaptation is to force something that can be easily covered or just is not as effective or is just costly to represent. Now, of course, there are always situations where like, you can do things like this. Like, you may catch someone off guard, you blitz them and you kill them at the end of the round. If this is a core part of your game plan, it's flawed just inherently, because if you can essentially defeat it without considering it, then that's a big part of it. I'm trying very hard to like make this as simple as possible because it's hard as fuck to understand, right? Like it's like, yeah, it's a lot to swallow. There's a lot to figure out. Being able to cover multiple options with one usually low risk option. That's essentially what I consider overlap. Because of how fast like the games can be or how explosive it can be hard to actually tell if you're actually doing something wrong or not until you play someone who just beats your ass for it. And then you may just think like, oh, my whole game plan is bad. Some people's game plan is like perfect, except they jump just a bit too much. And in the context of Strive, one mistake could be a game. This is why I produce the content I do. You cannot learn how to RPS without failing to RPS. Unless you're a god. Not just in like fighting games, but in every game I play, the goal is to play safe until someone has to like brute force. That's like the end game goal. Because again, to have your opponent commit to something that you do not need to commit to in order to beat. Now that we've emphasized this, you can see why overlap is such a problem. The end game goal, as essentially a competitor, as someone playing RPS, especially in a game like Strive, if you're playing Strive, this is not optional. This is a huge part of the game, is you want someone to essentially force overlap. Let's say even overlap in the case of May forces an interaction with Age Dolphin. You specifically start looking for Age Dolphin. People can, of course, take advantage of this. Like, I can cover your option without even thinking about it. That's all it is, right? So you start looking for Age Dolphin. May start IDing at you instead. You're already looking for her to move, and you're looking to press 6B, right? You just answer her because she did the option that lost to the thing you were already preparing, which was a counter to what she already established. This is the best way I've explained it so far. This, I think I nailed it on this one. Yeah, it's essentially rotating your options, right? And not just rotating your options in ways that do not link directly with each other. This is relevant for not necessarily characters, but how people play. And I'm gonna call out some of you with this, okay? If your consistent game plan is to do things like do a move that leaves you -3. You either super or 6P after it every time, looking to essentially beat someone for challenging you. If they block, the situation following is not that bad, right? It's pretty simple. If you super, you are probably about to die. If you super and they block, because this is essentially what produces overlap. Can you guess why? Block RTL into getting charged dusted. No matter how you complicate RPS, your opponent can always choose to minimize how they interact with you. Meaning you can backdash, super, 6P, like anything like that. They could just block every time or backdash. So like if you play around in this sort of way, no matter how much you add onto a stack, they could just choose, I'm just gonna block, because it's like, well, they super, they're dead. Again, this is where a lot of overlap tends to come from. People overcomplicate these interactions either through like, oh, I just don't want to block, I don't want to gamble. Here's a common one, and also I used to think like this, but it's pretty bad mentality. I gotta do something. Exclamation mark. Smiley face. Oh shit! There's an emoji. You do not want to block. That's you up there. 2 of the 3 options leads to someone picking the simplest option. Exactly, right? That's the point of this. Let's talk about if you add things like you start to backdash. Once you've established, you will super. They block, react to you moving, and then just walk forward. You just gave up space. If you do this and they're a low damage character, it's not that bad, right? Like you could, if you have like multiple chance, this is why essentially like it'll take like Faust like 1 billion times to kill you, versus like if you're Eno, I mean, you could just knock them down once and kill them, right? But if you play a character like Soul and someone's doing this to you as Eno, you're gonna fucking obliterate them, right? Or if it's like Nago or like any character who has high damage. This is a matchup specific strategy, not a consistent game plan strategy. The difference in here is that this RPS, again, is also a problem. This would be something that enables me to not play the matchup because your game plan's you're not playing the matchup either. Sometimes you could say like, oh, well, if I knock you down, I don't need the matchup, right? I knock you down, I stop play you, it doesn't matter. That's realistic. Some people are just that good at running offense, right? Like this is Daru's like perspective. He scrambles with you and he knocks you down because if he runs offense on you, he can probably kill you. His consistent game plan is to threaten things like this and then slow down from there. If you constantly just go, right? And this is also something important, you have to rotate these options. A common occurrence, what produces overlap in your game plan is usually omitting one of these options. Sometimes if you just never move, I mean, like people are not gonna be afraid of you. If you're never reactionary or passive, then you'll never take advantage of the way that your aggressive options make them have to be preemptive on reaction. Every Strive player I've made a comment about with like risk reward or RPS, usually they are guilty of this. But usually, almost entirely, like this is how I win. Like I'm not like incredible at matchups. It's usually I'm just good at taking advantage of this aspect of RPS. Nobody ever talks about shit like this. So it's hard to learn unless you're actually practicing or learning. But I mean, it's not like a problem with content creators. You can see, I mean, look how much shit I wrote just to explain this basic concept. I would consider everything I've wrote here basic to RPS. It's not like frame data, where you press it, 5 frames like startup, 3 frames active, 8 frames recovery. It's more like you press a button and you get anywhere between 5 and 20 frames startup, between 10 and 0 frames active, and between 10 and 100 recovery frames. Usually the best players, especially in Strive, are the ones that adapt almost instantly to something you do. Probably the best players of Strive currently. Like sometimes, even if you overuse something super powerful, like you'd think like, oh yeah, this option's that good, it should just win. Everyone's like, oh yeah, this option's great. But if you do something that's great and it's like becomes super predictable, sometimes that can make it not great. And that's also something that also ruins people's perspective of character strength, and also like where a lot of people go wrong, also understanding general character strength and the balance of a game. If someone's like, oh, like Nago's so easy, you just Beyblade every time and you win. And because Beyblade's so powerful, people are going to make strategies around it. Like, oh, I'm gonna move around it, I'm gonna space myself, I'm gonna gamble more when he's got higher blood. And then those things impact the decision making. And then, as a Nago player, people talk up this strategy or this button or this move that's like super broken. You may think, well, like these people are just complaining and they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. Like obviously Nago's not that good, just do this. Whereas it's a lot more complicated, right? Same with like people who are just like, oh, the option's that broken, just do it. I mean, it's a lot more complicated.